welcome back to my channel. My name is Kendra and today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. I ended up having a really great reading month. I ended up reading all 4 and 5 stars, which is absolutely amazing. It's a great start to my reading for the new year. And first I'm going to go through all of the stats. And in January, I ended up reading 9 books, and that is a total of 2,587 pages. I read 6 ebooks and 3 physical books. I read 4 Kindle books, 3 of my own books, 1 ebook, and 1 e-arc. I read all female authors, and they were all adult books. I read 6 romances, 2 contemporary, and 1 historical fiction. And like I said, for the star ratings, I read all 4 and 5 stars, so 0 1 star, 0 2 star, 0 3 star, 6 4 stars, and 3 5 stars. I'm going to talk about my least favorite all the way up to my favorite book of the month, although it was super hard to put these into an order of any sort, but this is the best I could do. So the first book that I want to talk about is Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. This is the first book in the Planet Barbarians series, and I buddy read this book with Shelby at Shelby Taggart Reads. And this is about a group of women. They are abducted by aliens and they are crammed inside of this like cage type thing, and they're going to an unknown destination, and then they crash on this like icy planet, and they find themselves free of all the aliens that were their abductors. And then Georgie, which is the main character, she sets out and she tries to find help and get supplies. And then while she is out, she runs into a native alien, and he is blue. This was a book that I definitely didn't see myself reading. I have heard really great things about it, so I was definitely excited to pick it up. And I'm really glad I did pick it up because this book was really good. I thought this book had a really great plot, and it was very steamy, which was great. And I definitely was invested in this book, and I really liked it. So if you are looking for a sci-fi romance, definitely pick this one up. The next book that I want to talk about is Planet Honeymoon, and this is the 1.5 in the Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. And this is just the continuation story of Georgie and Vectoral, which is the love interest in the first book. And this was just a short novella of them going on their honeymoon, and this one also had another great plot for how short it was, and it was definitely really steamy as well. So I definitely recommend this series if you have not picked it up. I gave Planet Barbarians and Planet Barbarians Honeymoon both 4 stars. And the next book that I want to talk about is Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. I gave this book 4 stars, and this is about Morgan and her sister. They are really close friends, and her boyfriend and her sister's boyfriend are also really close friends, and her sister's boyfriend Jonah and her are also really close. And then when Morgan becomes pregnant with her boyfriend's baby, which is Chris, after graduation, and Jonah ends up leaving town, and Morgan is heartbroken over this because he did not say why he was leaving or anything like that. So now we are 17 years later, and Morgan and Chris are now married, and their daughter is now 16 years old. Her name is Clara. Recently, Jenny reconnects, which is her sister, Morgan's sister, reconnects with Jonah, and they are now engaged, and they also have their own child. And then a huge tragedy ends up happening, and Morgan ends up questioning everything around her, and Clara and her mother have now been super disconnected because of this tragedy, and she turns to this boy Miller for some moral support, and then they start hitting it off romantically. So with this book, at first I was really nervous to read this one because I thought it was YA. However, I really don't think it is YA. I would definitely consider this an adult book, even though you're getting both perspectives of Morgan and Clara. But it doesn't read like a YA at all, so I was really glad for that because I did read Colleen Hoover's, what is that book? Something Merit. I can't remember what it's called, and I absolutely hated that book. So like I said, I was really hesitant to read this one, but I'm glad I did, and I didn't love this one as much as her previous books, but I did like this one. I loved how it was told in dual perspectives with Morgan and Clara, and I was really rooting for Morgan and Clara's relationship. I really wanted them to rebuild that relationship with each other, so I liked that about this book. And I really thought Clara and Miller's relationship was really sweet, and I'm really glad that he was there to help her through everything that she was going through. And there was one thing in this book that I was hoping to get more from. There is a part where there are letters that are centered around a event in the book, and they never read the letters, and I really wish they would have read the letters, because I don't know, I feel like that would have made this book more emotional for me, because I would have gotten a better understanding of what was going on. So overall, I really like this book, except I really just wanted a little bit more from it. But I cannot wait to read more from Colleen Hoover in the future. The next book that I want to talk about is Before We Were Strangers by Renee Carlino, and I buddy read this one with Chloe at Always Booked, and I also gave this book 4 stars. And this is about Matt and Grace. They meet in college. Their dorms end up being like really close to each other, so they end up becoming really close friends, and their friendship turns into a relationship. And then as their senior year is approaching, they end up pretty much going their separate ways in the summer, because Matt goes on an internship and Grace stays at home. So they end up losing connection with each other, and they just quit talking to each other. So now it is 15 years later, and Matt and his friends are getting on the subway, and he sees Grace on the train, and he cannot get to her fast enough so they can, talk to each other. And then he does everything he can to reach out to her. He ends up writing a post in their local newspaper, and she ends up reading it, and they end up reconnecting. And when they reconnect, they have a lot of issues that they need to work out from things that happened in their past. So I had a love-hate relationship with this book. I wasn't a huge fan of when they were in college. I felt like it kind of felt like it was high school-y in a way, so I wasn't really connecting with their relationship. But however, when they were adults, I loved their relationship. I loved watching them work through their issues. Do love that their relationship was a friends to lovers. We don't really get that much in books, so I really appreciate that they could connect more that way. And overall, I ended up really liking this book. I'm really glad that I ended up reading this one, and I'm really glad that I buddy read it with Chloe. The next book that I want to talk about is Stone Hearts by Amber Kelly. This is the second book in the Popular Fall series, and I gave this book 4 stars as well. And this is about Dallas and her son Beau. They move back to Poplar Falls after her ex-husband goes to prison, and she lives on the same property as her parents and her brother. And then there is Meyer. He also moves back to Poplar Falls after a career-ending football injury, and Meyer and Dallas are really good friends from high school, so they continue to be good friends when they're both back in Poplar Falls. Meyer always knew he had feelings for Dallas, and Dallas just always thought of him being a friend. But then one night, Dallas and Meyer are forced to sleep in the same tent together, and everything changes. So I really like this book. However, I do not think that is a standalone sequel like most romance books are. I feel like this is definitely a direct sequel to the first book, because you get a lot of the first couple, Sophie and Braxton, in this book, and I appreciate that. However, I wish that I got more of Meyer and Dallas's story. I thought their stories could be way more interesting, because definitely of Dallas's past, and you really don't get much of Meyer's past at all, like a very, very small bit. But like I said, really like this book. I loved how Meyer was with Dallas's son. He was so sweet, and his relationship with Dallas was absolutely adorable. I really love them together. So if you're looking for a friend to lover small town romance, definitely pick up this book. I'm really excited to read the next book in the series whenever it comes out, hopefully sometime this year. The next book that I'm going to talk about is His Royal Highness by R.S. Gray. I also gave this book 4 stars, and this is about Whitney. She gets an internship at Fairy Tale Kingdom, which is very similar to Disney World, and during her internship she gets a mentor, and when she meets her mentor, his name is Derek, and she kind of has a crush on him. So as time goes on, she ends up really developing this crush, and then she ends up writing an email to him saying she wants to go out on a date with him. And then the next day she gets an email back saying that he is no longer her mentor, that she now has a new mentor. So her new mentor ends up being the owner of the theme park, which her old mentor is the grandson of the owner. So then over the next 8 years, she ends up becoming one of the princesses at the theme park. And one evening when she is having dinner with the owner, Cal, she is stepping off of the elevator and runs into Derek, because he is back in town and he has to now work with her, and it is now super awkward. So I really love this book. I loved how it was set in a theme park, like a fairy tale theme park. I thought that was so fun, and I really thought this book was really, really funny. I loved the humor. Cal was absolutely hilarious, and he was so sneaky by what he does. I also loved Derek and Whitney's relationship. There was a point where I didn't think they were ever going to get together, but it is definitely a slow burn romance, and I loved it. They had amazing chemistry. So if you're looking for a lighthearted rom-com, I would definitely pick this one up. The next book that I'm going to talk about is How to Walk Away by Catherine Center. I gave this book 5 stars, and I buddy read this one with Tia at Tia and All the Books. And this is about Margaret. She just knows that her boyfriend Chip is going to propose to her on Valentine's Day. And when Valentine's Day comes around, they end up going to dinner. However, he surprises her and takes her to the airfield, and Margaret is absolutely terrified of flying, but Chip is in the process of becoming a pilot, so he ends up basically begging her to go up into the air, and she finally says yes, and they take off. And once they're up in the air, she starts feeling more comfortable, and then they go over this like beach area, and it says, "Will you marry me?" But it is another person's proposal, but he uses it as his own. So yeah, but she says yes. And then when they are going to land, there is a storm heading in, and when they go to land, it is very hard to land because the plane keeps whipping back up. But after like the 3rd attempt, they went to go land again. The wind ends up putting their airplane into like a tailspin. They end up crashing in a ditch, and she is stuck in the cockpit. The ship gets out of the aircraft and goes to find some help. And as soon as the firefighters come up to the airplane bursts into flames. And when she wakes up, she has 3rd-degree burns on her like collarbone and shoulder, and her face has 2nd-degree burns, and she is also paralyzed. So I had no idea what this book was when I went into it. I had no clue that she was the one that was in the tragedy, because I remember reading the synopsis and seeing that it was about a tragedy of some sort, and I thought it was about her fiance. I did not know it was about her, so I had no clue, and I absolutely loved this book. I just loved how strong of a woman she was after everything that she went through, and there's like a little romance in here that is absolutely adorable. Love it. And I think the moral of the story is everything happens for a reason, and that's just how it is. I mean, sometimes you have bad things that happen to you, and sometimes you have great things that happen to you, but it all happens for a reason. So, love this story. Loved buddy reading this one with Tia, and I cannot wait to read more by this author. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Flight Girls by Noelle Salazar, and this was our book talks after dark that I do with Shelby, and our guest host for January was Nicole at the Girly Girl Bookworm. So I am so glad that we picked this book because I gave this book 5 stars. This is a historical fiction set during World War II, and this is about Audrey. She loves to fly. Her father taught her how to fly, and she cannot get enough of it. So in 1941, she ends up going to Hawaii, where she trains Army pilots. And she also shares a house with other female pilots, and they all become very close friends. And she has her eye on Lieutenant James Hart, and they end up agreeing not to date each other. They just become close friends. And then in December of 1941, she is in the air, and that is when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Her whole world changed after that. So then she returns home, and she decides that she wants to join the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, which is the WASPs. And this is where she discovers to love to fly again because of what happened to her in Pearl Harbor. It was very difficult for her to want to fly again. While she is there at the training, her and James continue to write back and forth to each other, and he is actually serving in the war in Europe. Then one day she learns that his plane goes down and he becomes missing in action. So I absolutely loved everything about this book. The one thing that I really love about historical fiction is getting to learn new things, and I never knew anything about the WASPs before, so I thought that was the most fascinating thing to learn about. And I really loved how this World War II book was set in America. I really loved that about this book. I loved how Audrey had very strong female friends. The bonds between these girls were absolutely amazing, and I had the softest spot for Lieutenant James Hart so much. I wanted them to be together the whole entire book. So overall, I absolutely love this book, and I highly, highly recommend this one if you have not read it yet. And the last book that I want to talk about is Heartbreak Warfare by Heather M. Oregon and Kate Stewart. I gave this book 5 stars. It was absolutely amazing, and this is about Katie. She is getting deployed to the Middle East, and she leaves her husband and her son at home. And then once she's overseas, she really is missing her son and her husband, but thankfully her best friend is also deployed at the same time. And then one day, Katie and her best friend Mullins, they run into these 3 guys, and they all become really fast friends. However, one guy, Briggs, ends up flirting with Katie, and he knows that she's married, so it's just like harmless flirting per se. So then one day they are all out on a mission, and their Humvee is shot down, and Katie and Briggs get captured, and now they only have each other to survive. So when they finally get home, and Katie goes through a really tough time adjusting back, and the only person that she can turn to that understands is Briggs. This book absolutely ripped my heart out and crushed it. I never cried so much in a book in my life. I ended up reading the last bit of this book in the bathtub, and I literally just sobbed the whole time I was there. It was absolutely emotional. This is a love triangle between Briggs and her husband. I mean, you feel for both of them. I wanted her to be with Briggs because of what she went through. However, I felt bad for her husband because he was, at home waiting on her. However, what she went through was absolutely tragic, and I don't know how she and Briggs even survived this. So, like I said, this is a super, super emotional book. But if you love military romances and love triangles, I highly, highly recommend checking this book out. It was absolutely phenomenal. So those are all the books that I read in January. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these books or if you plan to read these books. And until then, I will see you in my next video. Bye!